Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 387, two films by Chris Marker, La Jetée, 1962, and Sans Soleil, 1981. Now Chris Marker is a really good example of what I've talked about before as the possibilities of cinema, where if you ever feel like that you could do more with cinema, that if you felt like, oh, there's, is all there is just narrative cinema? I mean, can't we do something else? He's definitely a go-to guy to explore the possibilities of what you can do in the medium. And he's one of those filmmakers that he's both known and not so well known through a combination of various things. Well, first off, he died last year, right when he turned 91, and so for that I say, Cat Chris Marker, wherever you are, peace be with you. I'll explain a little bit later why I said it like that. If you've seen any of these films, you'll know where it came from. But anyways, he had a very interesting career that was pretty much all done on his terms. And I mean, for instance, one of his early starts was he worked as an one of Alain René's assistant directors, particularly on Night and Fog. He worked primarily as a photojournalist, and that aspect influenced a lot of his work, including these two films. He was not afraid of video when it came out. In fact, he saw that it had the potential of doing a lot more, and that it can grow into something where you can do a lot. So he didn't shun away from any of that. In fact, he was looking forward to having more people be able to use the technology and make whatever kind of stories you want without the confines of a studio system. And he really is one of those rare filmmakers who didn't really have a full-on professional career. I mean, Truffaut had a professional career. Godard had a professional career, more or less. Well, even after he stopped doing commercial cinema, or as he called it, commercial cinema, it's still he was still operating on some kind of studio system. But Marker and Stan Brakhage, and there's probably a few others that I'm missing at the moment, but he's one of the few filmmakers that had a wide reach and is a major influence, but was not really a part of the studio game. In fact, if anything, he wanted to avoid as much of it as he could. And there's a lot of works to his name, but these two films really do encapsulate very well of what he's all about. Plus, there's a lot in it anyway to chew on, so it's never dull. And that's the surprising thing, is that these two films, they all fit in one disc. And La Jetée only lasts 27 minutes, and Sans Soleil lasts 103. So, but it's a very dense set of minutes. There's a lot in there, and it's continually inspiring in very different and also paradoxically very similar ways. La Jetée is a film that you probably know about before you even get a chance to see it. This is the film that, as far as its construction, it consists almost entirely of still photographs, with only one instance where there's actual film shot. But everything else was done, were just still photographs. And it's the science fiction story where it's after a nuclear blast that obliterates obliterates civilization, and there's this crazy idea of having a time machine and sending somebody back to be able to get help, and in so doing he has a little bit of a romance and obsession that meets with other things. I mean, it raises issues of, well, obviously it's based on time, and it's one of the and you can kind of blame this for any and all time travel stories, but also a seemingly preoccupation with Chris Marker is the notion of memory, which is also very similar to Alain Resnais. But what constitutes memory? What the elusiveness of it, the vividness of it, and he explores it more fully in Soleil. But I'm not quite there yet. I want to see if I can. If there's anything else I want to cover in La Jetée first. But it's one of those short. It's deceptively simple. Again, the construction of it is very simple, but yet it's one of those things where, in spite of its apparent simplicity, there is a lot going on, and even if you're somebody that likes to pick apart narrative, and there is kind of a narrative in this, but I don't think that's really the point. The point is, I think, is partly to raise questions, partly to capture mood, and I would also assume, I think it's also safe to assume, just to try something. Let's see if we try it this way. Who says that cinema has to be at 24 frames a second? And this is partly what makes it so inspiring, is that while it's comprised of still images, it's the way that the images themselves, the way they play out in a sequence, and combining that with the voiceover narration, describing, laying out the story. In a way, it feels like cinema, even though it does not fulfill one of its, I guess you could call it its essential component of having a quick succession of images to give the illusion of movement. But because it's a sequence of images, it's just not. I would say that it is a sequence of images, except it's just not played at 24 consistent frames a second. And in that sense, it emphasizes, I think, the musicality of cinema. You get a sense of the rhythm of the images, and everything plays out, and it works on that level also. So, and by the way, this is one of those deservingly dense ones. This is not something that was deliberately constructed to piss people off, and then suddenly profundity was added on after the fact. I think there was a lot in there already, and even if Chris Marker could only put in so much, it invites you to take in meaning from it. So again, I'm sorry if I'm being kind of vague, but I don't want to. It is something that if I'm not careful, I could probably go on and on about it, and I don't want it to devolve into just mere rambling. Then there's the second film. If La Jetée is comprised of still photographs that tells a it's essentially a science fiction story. You have Sans Soleil, which also has been called different things. I lean more on. I feel that it's more of a film essay. Others have described it as a documentary and a travelogue, and I will shortly explain why. But I think it's more closer to a film essay. What it's comprised of are 60mm footage that Chris Marker himself shot while he was traveling, particularly to Japan and Guinea-Bissau, and a few other little places as well. He did a stint in Iceland. There's an extended sequence in San Francisco where he spends a lot of time there, and particularly pointing out the Vertigo. And there's also a Vertigo connection in La Jetée as well. And I like to think, I don't think I'm totally alone on this, but my theory was that Chris Marker found out that Vertigo was #1 on the critics poll for Sight and Sound for 2012, and so once he sees that, he can say, "I can die a happy man now," and then there you go. So I did find that I don't believe that's really true, but it's interesting to point out the timing that happened. So. At any rate, and by the way, that's Sans Soleil is also where I get that phrase. There's a moment where there's a comment about the way cats are revered in Japan, and Chris Marker was a cat aficionado. In fact, while technically this is director approved, it actually says it's Guillaume approved. Guillaume being one of his, probably the cat or one of his cats that he uses as his public signature. He's one of those guys that does not want to sign anything himself, and when he does, if he does want to put his name down on something, he usually draws a picture of his cat, Guillaume. So this is Guillaume approved. So actually, that was in rediscovering the films. It kind of makes me wonder if Chris Marker had some subliminal impact on the internet, and why you have this fascination with cats, and particularly with the cats in the interwebs. So I'm wondering if Chris Marker is, in some ways, embodies a cat spirit that still kind of wanders around the interwebs and kind of going, "Oh, I like this. What is this?" Or whatever he chooses to do. Or maybe he just finds a little server somewhere and just does a little cat nap. But I seriously digress. Back to Sans Soleil. But yeah, it comprises of footage that he has shot while he was traveling, and then over on top of it are these. They're supposed to be letters, is how you hear it, but it's also arguable that these were not really letters, but they were written as letters, but they were more essays, contemplations on a garden variety of topics, whatever was, and I think it's safe to assume these were all things that intrigued and fascinated Chris Marker, and these are various philosophical musings. And again, there's the concept of memory, and how because part of memory is elusive, it can affect not only your own life and future, it can also affect larger groups, their lives and their future. So again, it's one of those things you kind of have to. I can't really describe it, but I can describe the parts of it, but it's one of those things you have to experience. And I would say that if you want to dive into the experimental realm, if if I've said anything out of this, out of either this episode or subsequent episodes, that talks about that there is something to be gained by watching experimental films, Chris Marker is a really good one to start. For starters, he doesn't have that alienating factor, which is commonly associated with experimental filmmakers. It's, you know, being provocative for the sake of being provocative, wanting to do something to, you know, piss off whoever, whether it be the powers that be, whether it be conventions or so forth. I mean, don't get me wrong, Chris Marker, I think, wants to challenge conventions, but not in a way of, oh, look at me, I want to, look, I'm battering down the system. It's more, I think, just more trying something out. And yes, it's fueled by circumstance, and yes, it's fueled by what he had available, but this is an example of creativity, of you know, triumphing over those, you know, what you could see as limits or hindrances. He saw it as a way of saying, well, we can do something with this, or I want to do something with this. And now you could argue also that, I mean, I think I've said this before about how there's always a danger where an artist can act solipsistic, or you can get so absorbed into your own symbolism or your own constructs that you end up more just entertaining yourself. I don't think that was necessarily his way. I mean, the fact that he worked on a lot of different projects, and in his later career, and by that pretty much starting from the 90s onwards, he was interested in multimedia projects and video art installations, and it was all pretty much for the name of just exploring ideas. And when you have that kind of public appearance through your art, and that's the thing with Chris Marker, he didn't want to bask in the celebrity of it. He didn't want to make himself a public appearance. He wanted to let his art make the public experience. That to him was really, really important. And when you have that mindset, part of the goal is to communicate, and is to connect with people. That should be one of the aims of art. Not just mere self-satisfaction. I think it is important that whatever vision you have in mind be satisfied, but it's not just purely for yourself. I mean, and that becomes masturbation, a form of masturbation, and that's not what this is about. So, you know, I would say that if you want to take that jump, Chris Marker is a great way to do it, because he works with, because the elements are familiar. It's just arranged in a particular way that is different, but at the same time very inspiring. And again, like La Jetée, it's you know, in this little short film that isn't even shot consistently at 24 frames a second. It does a lot of what you would expect for cinema to do. And this is one of the benefits of looking at experimental films, is to kind of get you to see things in a different way, or get you to think about things in a different way. So, but yeah, it's, again, high recommendation, especially La Jetée. And yes, La Jetée was the most famous offspring of this would be 12 Monkeys. And if you would think that Chris Marker would find it offensive that Terry Gilliam did that, actually he was quite flattered at the time. Because for him, he wasn't that big on ownership, but that was him, and it makes sense. Like once the art is out there, then I think it's up to the next crop of artists to kind of build on that. It's not about ripping off. It's not about stealing something because you can't come up with anything original. I don't really believe there's anything really original anyway. It's all traced back to something. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. But what makes something original is in the combination of things. It's the angle and the approach you take. It's what things you want to explore, want to bring forth. That is what makes it original. It's not the wow factor. And again, this is kind of the danger, and these films are wonderfully immune from that. Certainly so far, they're immune from the novelty aspect, where if something something shows up and it's hailed as groundbreaking, it's like, oh wow, and then especially if a lot of people are familiar with it, and then the novelty of it wears out, and you're like, okay, what's so special about this? But again, there's still a freshness and vitality to it that's still very inspiring. Even though, like La Jetée, it's over 50 years old, and but it's still very inspiring. And Sans Soleil is over 20, and again, it's also very inspiring. So again, if you want to get into experimental films, can't go wrong with Chris Marker. And those were 2 films by Chris Marker. And until next time, take care.